Hello, my friends. How you doing? Your buddy Phil here, project management trainer and coach. I know lots of you are studying for the PMP exam still, and I know that a lot of you are getting ready for the test using a little bit of this book, but some of you might need further clarity on page 25 in that book. So I want to take a little bit of time to explain to you about knowledge areas and process groups, and I want to use a project story, using a project that I've worked on with a little bit of fiction as an example. So taking a look at this image here, we have the 5 process groups at the top and the 10 knowledge areas at the side. So I want you to imagine a project that is being worked on by a team of 5 individuals in a company. Let's take a look at some of these individuals who are working on this project. The first person is Priyanka, our chief architect. She designs the technology, she designs the architecture, and this architecture is meant to align with standards, processes, procedures, and targets. Now, as you know, in these kind of projects where you're working on technology type stuff, it's not done with just one person. So even though you've got an architect, you've got to have a bunch of other folks working with you. So one of the other people who is working on this project is a developer. So I want you to meet our developer. We call her Sumi. She's our developer, and she works on programming code. We call her a coder, software engineer, IT professional. The bottom line is she's really good with HTML. I know some people think it's obsolete, but a lot of companies still use HTML, Java, and she's also good with Python. Our next team member is Isha. Isha is a tester, right? So she's involved in creating and completing detailed test plans. She writes test scripts, use cases, and she tests the site. She tests site security, technology, and functionality. She's really good at what she does. The next team member is our project manager. The project manager is Esther, and Esther has a PMP, lots of years of experience. Some people think that she's tough, but she's just quality aware, right? She manages the project well, she assigns resources, manages schedule, cost and scope, and manages procurements and other project responsibilities. Now, the final person on the team that we'll talk about here, his name is Phil, is responsible to make resources available, pretty much our go-to person in management. The project manager works with Phil, right, to address internal political and strategic issues that could impact the team or the viability or quality of the project. So going back to what we're talking about, this project, it started off with the development of a project charter. So our project manager worked with Phil to create a project charter. And the main purpose of the project charter is to authorize the project. And that's exactly what it did. Authorize the project, and it authorized our project manager, Esther, to apply resources to the project. The next thing that happened is Esther started working with Phil, the sponsor, to identify possible stakeholders that could impact the project, okay? Now, the stakeholders that could impact the project, they're from a company known as PLI. In other words, Project Leadership Institute. The Project Leadership Institute wanted our company to build a website for them. They had various bells and whistles they were looking for in this website. So of course, there are going to be stakeholders that wanted to be in on what was going on, okay? So when the identify stakeholders process was done, Esther began talking to Phil and telling Phil, hey, you know, we need more and more people. And actually, that's where we bring in the team, right? So I've introduced you to the team ahead of time, but the team was actually acquired and they were sent for training, which is develop team, and of course, given feedback all throughout the project. So that's all those 3 things. Now, like I said, lots of documentation was developed. We're not going to go into every single document, but if you wanted to get an idea of what a project charter looks like, going down to the website, I'm going to put it right here on the screen, tinyurl.com/Sigma PMO. Take a look at that site, and you'll be able to see a bunch of documents that I'll refer to all throughout, because you'll be able to see project charters, examples of WBSs, stuff like that. Okay. So going back to what exactly happened, at a super high level, the team started putting together a plan for how to manage this entire project. So we had to plan scope management. There was a scope management plan, and a scope management plan is simply a plan for how to manage scope. Some of the things that we would put in a scope management plan would include how we're going to manage scope, how we're going to collect requirements, so on and so forth. And then we actually get into the collection of the requirements. So if you have never seen a requirements traceability matrix before, or anything that is similar to requirements documentation, let me show you a pretty easy example for you to grasp. Let's take a look. Right here, we have a requirements traceability matrix, and you can see the requirements, their priority, category, the source of the requirements is really important. And then how do those requirements map back to components of the WBS? Okay. Another thing that we do in scope management is we create a document called a project scope statement. And a scope statement is a very helpful document because it helps us delineate fact from fiction. So a document like this was created, right? And in this kind of document, you would specify the product scope at a high level, in detail, actually. Project deliverables in detail. So this is a more detailed document. Exclusions in detail, acceptance criteria, constraints, assumptions. So as opposed to it being a high-level document like the project charter, which is a high-level document, this is actually a pretty detailed document. So you get the idea. The other thing I want to call your attention to is the work breakdown structure, because that's something else that we do in scope. So when we talk about scope management, you got to understand that a WBS such as this is created, and it just helps us break down the work into smaller, more manageable pieces. Okay, so there you have it. All right, so let's go back to where we were. So we talked about scope, right? We create the WBS, and after that, we move into this knowledge area known as schedule management. So in schedule management, we're first of all planning how are we going to manage the schedule. And you've got to remember who is a main figure in this whole thing about how we're going to develop and manage the schedule. So our project manager, Esther, decided, you know what, let's use Project Libra. And honestly, no one had heard about Project Libra. It was kind of new to a lot of us, but she was adamant that this was a really good idea. So we ended up using, Project Libra. So this is Project Libra. And this is where we developed our schedule. So we, first of all, have our define activities. Then we sequence the activities in the order that we wanted them to occur, as you can see there. And if you take a close look on the right-hand side, you have our Gantt chart. And the Gantt chart just shows you pretty much, as you can see, the sequence, the order of things. So we have our sequence activities using this functionality. And then we estimated our durations. How long will each activity take? And then we decided on the dates and so on. All right. So when you talk about schedule management, that's what you do. You're defining the activities, you're sequencing the activities, you're estimating the activity duration based on the resources assigned, and boom, you got your schedule. That's pretty much it. Okay. So going back, Esther was extremely glad that we listened to her, we joined forces and built the schedule together. It was a team thing. All right, and that's pretty much what happens in schedule management. You go through all of those steps, and then we move into the aspect of planning cost management. There was a question of how you're going to manage cost. And the general consensus was to do things as high level as possible, not to go too crazy in the estimate. So we had some high level estimates, but you got to remember that the estimates were actually based on our resource estimates. Because based on the resources assigned to the project, after you've planned how to manage resources, right? After the resources have been estimated, you then have to crunch down some numbers. So guess what we did? We used Project Libra for our cost, and we assigned the resources This is a resource loaded schedule. So if we go to our resources here, you can see we have our resources all in there, see all their names in there. And you can also see, much to the horror of the company who hired us, we all charge $100 an hour. So when you go to the Gantt chart, you can see how much the total project was. If you roll it up into a final total, the total budget is almost 30K. And 30K for a website. Well, we build websites for a number of individuals, so they're quite confident about our work, right? So the summary, my friends, so far is we've talked about how you would go about planning, schedule, and then cost. And then the other things, such as quality. Our tester, she has a really keen idea for how quality should be upheld on the project. And there are various quality standards that she was aware of. We adhere to those. We've already talked about the resources, so you know how that goes. As far as the project management plan is concerned, remember the project management plan also contains a communications management plan. So guess what we did? You got it. We created a communications management plan. I mean, we had to, right? Because the idea was for us to follow all these PMBOK standards, which has a communications management plan. So there's a communications management plan. We decide the purpose of the project and who we need to communicate with. So once we know what the purpose of the project is, we know who the stakeholders are, we can then fine tune our reporting, distribution of information, communication with some more finesse. So that's what we did in planning communications management. And then we got into risk management. And you know that risk is quite an important area. So for this one, we actually assembled the entire team. That's right, the entire team. The entire team, they pretty much just took over the conference room. They took over the conference room and they started brainstorming. What are the risks that could impact the project? And of course, a big one came up, which was security. And our chief architect was a little bit disturbed by the fact that security was a major issue. And the people from PLI sat down and explained why security was an issue. So we were able to glean a whole lot of risks, not just about security, but a bunch of things. Now, I want you to understand that the product of a meeting such as that is going to be a number of things. First of all, there's going to be a solid risk management plan. If there's concerns about uncertainty, then you definitely want to start off with a plan, a risk management plan, that's for sure. You also want to introduce the concept of what we call a risk register. And a risk register is where you would log possible risks, okay? So the idea needs to be not only to plan how to manage risks, but to actually have a risk register, okay? So this document kind of doubled as both. Down here, you can see different ideas as we began fleshing them out for risk. But what you don't see is the security concerns, of course, because they're sensitive. So I can't show you those. Haha. All right, going back here, there are a number of things we did. So we identified the risks. We also took a look at the probability that the risk would occur. We took a look at the quantitative risk analysis, the monetary impact if they did occur. And then we also planned responses. What would we do if those risks happened? Another big thing that we did was procurement. So there were not too many procurements, but there were some. We actually did consult with an agency. There's an agency that sent a representative to us as a project coordinator. So look at this as staff augmentation. She would come in for a few hours here and there, and she would do a few hours a week. And we had a contract. We had a not to exceed, though, every week. So she would come in, support the project the best she could, and help the project manager, Esther. And Esther was really happy about that. Now, stakeholder engagement, again, is a big deal. So as far as engaging our stakeholders, as you can probably imagine, all hands on deck. Everybody was involved. I mean, everyone. There was no one who was not involved. Everyone was involved in the stakeholder engagement, right? We ensured that people were communicating to stakeholders as necessary. We were not relying on the project manager for central communication. We got a little bit creative and we tried to use a little bit more of an agile approach so that if anyone needed a stakeholder's input, they were able to get to the stakeholder right away. All right. So we engaged our stakeholders. What can I say? We engaged them really, really well. Straight to the stakeholders that we needed. And that was how we ran on the project. Now, moving over to the executing process group. Our project manager was involved in good leadership and guidance. We created the deliverable. That's what you do in direct to manage project work. And then we get into this one called managed project knowledge. And you might have guessed, managed project knowledge is all about lessons learned. It's about identifying the lessons learned, compiling the lessons learned, sharing the lessons learned. So we created a document similar to this. And here we have our lessons learned register. We have categories, the problem or the success, the impact, and the recommendation. Now, one of the things I asked them to add to this document was the action, how we're going to act on it and how we're going to do it. And that's how ours differs a little bit from this. All right, so going back here, we've talked about two things in executing. The next thing is the management of quality. We call it managed quality. Now, managed quality is really code for QA, quality assurance. Quality assurance is all about checking the process. Quality control, on the other hand, is about checking the product. So anytime you see manage, a lot of times it's all about executing. See that? This is all about executing. So managed quality is about executing the plan to carry out these audits and ensure the team is on task as far as quality is concerned, making sure that the process is being carried out well. Acquire resources, develop team, and manage team. I've kind of explained this to you. This doesn't have to happen midway in the project. It actually happened earlier, remember? Because I've already introduced you to all the team members. The team members were acquired like really early. Priyanka came on the project pretty early. Sumi came on the project early. Isha came on the project early. And of course, the sponsor, he was already on the project, authorizing the project and so on. And Esther, our project manager. So just be aware that in the world of the PMBOK guide, you do not have to follow everything in strict rotation. You can actually go out of order where it makes sense. All right, so for this next area, I've already told you that managed communications has a lot to do with planning how to engage your stakeholders and then communicating with them and engaging with them. So there's some kind of connection, if you will. You plan how to engage them, and then you actually have to communicate with them, but you're also communicating with them in a bid to engage them. So there's that type of confluence of stuff happening that you need to be aware of, okay? The next thing that happens in executing goes into implementing risk responses. So this is where we carried out our responses about how we're going to counteract any of those risks, scope risks, schedule risks, and especially those security risks. The next thing that happens is conduct procurements, but I told you we brought on a project coordinator. We went through about 5 companies and we chose the best company to provide that project coordinator support for us. And that's pretty much conduct procurements. But some people typically ask, but Phil, what about acquire resources? Isn't that sort of the same thing? They're connected. So in acquiring resources, you could decide to acquire resources through a procurement. And that's pretty much what we did. All right. And we've already talked about managed stakeholder engagement being communicating with stakeholders with a purpose to engage them. You see, that's the difference between managed communications, communicating to fulfill the plan, the promise, to give them that information. But managed stakeholder engagement is communicating with stakeholders in a bid to engage them and work with them. So you get the idea. All right. The next thing here is the monitoring and controlling process group. And this is where our project manager, Esther, created work performance reports. Now, if you've worked on projects long enough, you know what these look like. I guarantee you've probably seen some of them, right? So let me show you a typical project performance report. Let's take a look. Here's a project performance report. See that? Project performance report. Now, on some projects, the report may not look like this. On some projects, the report could be a 4-up. It could be a 4-up chart. In other words, it could be a very high-level chart with 4 columns, 4 columns that have a status of, for example, risks, issues, key decisions, and things such as that. So just be aware that not every work performance report or project performance reports look like this. Okay. But the summary is, this is indeed what we're doing on the project in the monitor and control project work process. Okay. So you got to remember, our project manager, Esther, is responsible quite heavily for that process. Okay. It's called monitor and control project work. Now, just as we were done with our design phase, we immediately got a change request to add 12 additional pages. And the whole idea about these 12 additional pages was to add value. They wanted us to add more value to help them with the engagement of their visitors. So we did a perform integrate change control process where the change control board reviewed the change request. Now, if you have not seen what a change request looks like, it's a very simple document to understand. Now, I'll show you an example of a change request, but you often hear people refer to this as a change request form. A change request form is just a template that a stakeholder fills in requesting a change on the project. Okay, so a change request form is usually decided as far as the format is concerned in the company that is doing the work, the performing organization. So here's an example of a type of change request form. And you can see the description of what is going on, the reason for the change, the category, and the effect of the change, and things such as that. So a lot of these are just documents that you use. There's really no need to be afraid of these in documents. So we did our perform integrate change control. Validate scope is where the company inspected the final site and decided to either approve or reject what we had done. And the good news is, yeah, they accepted what we designed. So the Project Leadership Institute designed this site and it was accepted. And that's validate scope. Now, in the middle of the project, the sponsor, Phil, had a bright idea. He wanted to add all these bells and whistles and fancy features to the website. So he jumps into the conference room and begins narrating what he wanted to see as changes. But the project manager shut him down. Esther shut him down because Esther said, there's absolutely no reason for us to add more. That's gold plated. This isn't what the customer asked for. This is what you want. And no, you are the sponsor, but no. And that was control scope in action, okay? Now, control schedule is where our project manager prevented us from lagging behind schedule. Control cost is where she took a look at the budget and she decided there were not going to be any more happy hours, no more happy hours. She shut them down. Control quality is where we checked to make sure our quality standards were inherent in the website. And you got to remember our tester who did brilliant work, Isha, she knew all about what needed to be done, right? She also took responsibility for testing all manner of possibilities of this site on different devices. So she had the technology to do that, and she did a really good job. All right, so going into the aspect of controlling resources, this is where the project manager ensured that the resources were used as planned. Monitor communications is where the project manager ensured the communications were going according to plan. Monitor risks, she ensured that those risks were truly what we thought they were and were where we thought they were. Control procurements is where we ensure that the vendor, the supplier or contractor, if you will, gave us everything we requested. In other words, that project coordinator, she really did a great job. And she actually came in towards the middle to just help us begin compiling and collating lessons learned. Monitor stakeholder engagement is where you monitor to make sure your stakeholders are engaged, making sure the people at PLI were engaged. And closing is closing out a project or phase. So when we were done with validate scope, after we had gotten acceptance, guess what happened? We close out the final phase and we close out the project. And that was it. It was that simple. And my friends, we've come to the end of our breakdown of the PMBOK guide, 6th edition, all the processes. You got to remember the overarching mindsets, the overarching mantras. We're not just creating stuff for creating sake. We're doing it to offer benefits and value, okay? You got to remember your process groups: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, and controlling, and closing. You can use this mnemonic. I prefer eating mangoes chilled, okay? And then you also need to remember the knowledge areas. We have 10 knowledge areas: integration, scope, schedule, cost, quality, resources, communications, risk, procurement, and stakeholder management. And these are going to help you to be able to label these processes, to be able to recall them. I have a mnemonic for that. It's called I saw 6 chipmunks quietly roasting coffee, reading poetry stories. It's really going to help you. It's really going to help you. All right. So I hope you enjoyed this fictitious and somewhat real story about project management, brought to you courtesy of Project Management Masterclass. If you have enjoyed this narration and you're curious to learn a little bit more about what we do, courses that we have, going down to either Praizion.com or projectmanagementdoctor.com. When you get to projectmanagementdoctor.com, just scroll down and take a look at the courses we've got. We teach everything from leadership, project management, communications, JIRA, user story mapping, risk management, you name it. We got a lot of content that you can tap into right away, instant downloads and stuff. All right. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope this helps clarify what I call the behemoth. I hope it clarifies, okay? Now, as far as this is concerned, right? I have a 2-hour video out there on YouTube that talks about the 7th edition, right? And I also have a book. If you really want the 7th edition simplified, go on down to projectmanagementdoctor.com, look for that book, click on it. It'll take you to Amazon. You can grab it right now. Thank you very much, my friends. You take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.